There is a smell that you cannot order from an app. You know the one I'm talking about. It starts before you even get out of bed on a Sunday morning. It comes up through the floorboards. It slides under the bedroom door. It wraps itself around you before you open your eyes. And even before your feet hit the floor, you already know. Big Mama is in the kitchen, and Sunday dinner is already underway. That smell was not just food. That smell was a promise. A promise that no matter what happened out there in the world during the week, and Lord knows things happened, when Sunday came around, this family was going to sit down together, at this table, in this house, with this food. And everything was going to be all right. I don't know when we stopped keeping that promise. I don't know when Sunday became just another day. I don't know when the kitchen went quiet and the phone lit up instead. But I know it happened. I know it happened because I've seen it. I've watched it. And every time I see a grandchild place an order on a little screen for something that their grandmother would have started cooking the night before, I feel something I can't quite name. It's not anger. It's not judgment. It's something closer to grief. Because what got lost wasn't just a recipe. What got lost was the ritual, and the ritual was what held people together. Today, family, we're going back, all the way back to those Sunday kitchens. We're going to look at 22 plates that Big Mama made with her own 2 hands. And we're going to look honestly at what her grandchildren are tapping on their phones today when Sunday rolls around and nobody feels like cooking. Not to shame anybody, not to point fingers, but to remember. Because if we don't remember, it's gone. And some things are too precious to let go quietly. Hey family, I'm James. Welcome to Forgotten Black Memories, the place where we keep these stories alive every single week. If you're new here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. We're building something real here. A community of people who remember and people who are trying to learn what they missed. So go ahead, subscribe, ring that bell, and let's get into it. Because today, we've got 22 plates to talk about, and every single one of them is a piece of who we are. Now before we dive in, I want to set up how we're going to move through this today. These 22 dishes, we're going to see them through 3 sets of eyes. First, through the eyes of Big Mama herself, the woman who built Sunday dinner with nothing but skill and love, and a kitchen that had been her classroom since she was old enough to reach the stove. Then through the eyes of her children. The generation that learned, that watched and helped and carried some of it forward, even when life got busy and the corners started getting cut. And finally, through the eyes of the grandchildren, who are good people, family, who are busy people, who are people doing the best they can, but who are, more often than not, reaching for a phone on Sunday afternoon instead of reaching for a skillet. Let's begin. Number 1, fried chicken. Now I want you to think about what that phrase meant in a black household in 1963, because it did not mean what it means when you tap on a screen today. When Big Mama said fried chicken, she meant a process that started the night before. She meant a whole bird, not a box, not a bag of pre-cut pieces, not something that had been sitting under a heat lamp. A whole bird that she broke down herself with hands that knew exactly where every joint was, every bone, every piece of skin that needed to stay on to hold the flavor in. She soaked that chicken in buttermilk overnight with a little hot sauce and a little salt. She seasoned her flour in a cast-iron skillet so old it had its own history, and she fried that chicken in lard that had been rendered from a pig she knew the provenance of. The crust that came off that bird was not a coating. It was armor. It was mahogany-colored, and it shattered when you bit into it, and the inside was so juicy it almost ran down your arm if you weren't careful. Her children watched. Her daughter stood at her elbow and memorized the wrist motion, the way she tested the oil with a drop of water, the sound the chicken made when it hit that skillet, that particular violence of a good fry. They made it themselves. Maybe not exactly the same. Maybe they switched from lard to Crisco somewhere in the late 60s when the health warnings started coming out. Maybe they bought the chicken already cut, but they made it. On Sunday, in a hot kitchen. Because that was how you showed your family they mattered. Her grandchildren, though. Her grandchildren opened the DoorDash app on a Sunday afternoon and they tap on Popeyes or Raising Cane's or whatever the chicken spot is in their neighborhood, and 45 minutes later, somebody knocks on the door with a bag, and the chicken inside that bag is fine. It is genuinely fine. But it did not start the night before. Nobody soaked it in anything. Nobody seasoned a skillet that belonged to their grandmother. Nobody stood in a kitchen with oil spattering their forearm and called it love. What was lost is not just a recipe. What was lost is the 3 generations of knowledge that lived inside that recipe. And you cannot DoorDash knowledge. You cannot have knowledge delivered in 45 minutes. Number 2, mac and cheese. And I do not mean mac and cheese from a blue box. I mean baked macaroni and cheese, the kind that Big Mama pulled out of a 400-degree oven on a Sunday with a dish towel wrapped around her hand. And when she set it on the counter, the top of it was brown and bubbled and cracked in a way that was almost architectural. That crust on the top was not an accident. It was a skill. It required knowing how much cheese to put in and which cheeses, because Big Mama was not using 1 cheese, she was using 2 or 3. She had opinions about sharp cheddar versus mild. She had a view on whether to add a little Velveeta for creaminess or whether that was cheating, and those opinions had been formed over decades of Sunday dinners and family feedback. She made a roux first. She knew what a roux was before the word existed in her vocabulary. She made it with butter and flour in a pot on the stove, and then she poured the milk in slowly, stirring, always stirring, until the whole thing came together into something thick and golden. Then she added the cheese. Then she poured it over the noodles she had already boiled. Then she put it in the oven and she let the oven do the rest. Her children made this too, Sunday after Sunday. The dish was understood to be mandatory. You could come to Sunday dinner without a lot of things. You could not come to Sunday dinner without mac and cheese. Her grandchildren today pull up Uber Eats and they look for something called baked mac at the soul food restaurant 3 miles away. And they find it, and it's good, and they order it, and it costs $11. And when it arrives, it is in a foil container, and the top is not quite as brown as they want it to be. And somehow the cheese doesn't taste exactly the way they remember it tasting at their grandmother's table, and they can't figure out why. I can tell you why. Because what they remember tasting was not just cheese. It was the patience of the woman who stood at that stove and stirred. Number 3, collard greens. Child, let me tell you something about collard greens. If Big Mama made them wrong, the whole Sunday dinner suffered. Because collard greens are not a side dish. They are the backbone. They are what cleanses your palate and prepares you for everything else on the table. And to make them right, truly right the way they were made in black kitchens across the South for generations, you needed time. You needed a ham hock or smoked turkey necks or salt pork, and you needed to start that pot long before anyone woke up on Sunday morning. The greens had to be washed leaf by leaf because they came from a garden or they came from somebody who grew them, and they had actual dirt on them, the kind of dirt that does not rinse off in one pass. They had to be stripped from the stem and stacked and cut, and then they had to go into that pot with the smoked meat and the onion and the red pepper and the vinegar, and they had to cook. Not for 20 minutes, not for 45. They had to cook for hours. Low heat, lid on, just barely simmering, until they turned from something leafy and tough into something almost silken, dark green, yielding, saturated with every flavor from every ingredient in that pot. Big Mama's children made collard greens on Sundays, even when they moved north. Even when they got to Chicago or Detroit or Cleveland and couldn't always find the smoked turkey necks at the store on the corner. They found a way. Because Sunday without greens was not Sunday. Her grandchildren order them from a soul food spot now. Sometimes they come good. Sometimes they come overcooked. Sometimes they come underseasoned because the restaurant is cooking for 100 people at once, and they can't taste every pot the way Big Mama could taste her pot. And the pot liquor, that precious dark broth at the bottom of the greens that Big Mama served in a cup alongside the plate. The broth that tasted like every good thing that had been cooked in that pot, that doesn't make it into the delivery container, that stays at the restaurant, or it gets poured down the drain, and that is a loss that does not show up on the receipt. Now, if this is the kind of memory we're carrying on this channel every single week, and it is, family, every single week, then I need you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This is where these stories live. Number 4. Smothered pork chops. Big Mama could take a pork chop, a thin, inexpensive cut from the store, the kind that didn't cost much because it was the kind that required skill to make tender, and she could turn it into something that people talked about on Monday. The process was this. She seasoned those chops with garlic powder and onion powder and black pepper and a little cayenne, and she dredged them in flour, and she browned them on both sides in a cast-iron skillet until they had a crust on them. Then she set them aside. In that same skillet, with all the drippings and the browned flour and the fat, she made her gravy. Onions sliced thin, bell pepper, celery, all of it sweated down into something soft and sweet. Then she added flour, added her liquid, a little broth, a little water, and she stirred until the gravy was thick and dark and smelled like the bottom of that skillet, which was the smell of every Sunday that skillet had ever seen. Then she put the chops back in, lid on. Low heat, 30 more minutes, and what came out of that skillet was not a pork chop anymore. It was something that fell off the bone when you looked at it. The gravy had gotten into the meat. The meat had flavored the gravy. The whole thing was one unified creation, and it needed nothing but rice underneath it to be a complete and perfect meal. Her children learned the smothered chop. Some of them made it on weeknights when the budget was tight, because smothered pork chops were budget food made to taste like luxury. That was the genius of Big Mama's generation. They knew how to make something from very little, and they were not ashamed of that knowledge. They wore it like a badge. Her grandchildren, if they want something smothered today, open the app and scroll until they find a soul food plate. They'll get the chop. They'll get something gravy adjacent, but the relationship between the person eating and the food they're eating, that's been severed. There's no history between them and that plate. It arrived. It was consumed. It was thrown away in a container, and nothing was passed on. Number 5. Candied yams. Not sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows on top. I'll get to that in a moment. I mean candied yams the old way. Dark sweet potatoes, the kind that stained your hands orange when you peeled them, sliced into thick rounds and layered in a baking dish with butter and brown sugar and cinnamon and nutmeg and a little vanilla extract, and then baked low and slow until the sugar had caramelized and thickened into a syrup, and the yams had gone from firm to yielding to something that held together just barely, just enough, while also threatening to dissolve into pure sweetness if you looked at them too long. Big Mama made this from memory. There was no written recipe. There were amounts she knew by feel. A pat of butter this big, enough sugar to cover the bottom, spices measured in her palm. She had made this dish so many times that her body knew it. Her hands knew it. The recipe was stored not in a notebook, but in her muscle memory, and the memory of every Sunday she had ever cooked it. Her children made candied yams. They maybe wrote some of the amounts down at some point because they weren't sure their hands remembered it the same way. Or they asked. They called Big Mama on the phone and said, "How much butter, Mama?" And she said, "Enough, baby." And somehow that was an answer they understood. Her grandchildren scroll past the soul food options on the app, and sometimes they see sweet potato something on the menu, and they order it, and it comes with the marshmallows, and it's fine, it's sweet, it's orange. But it is not the same geometry. It is not the same texture. It is not the caramelized pool of syrup at the bottom of Big Mama's dish that you sopped up with a piece of cornbread. That specific thing does not exist anywhere on any delivery platform in America. It only existed in her kitchen, and now it has to exist in your memory or not at all. Number 6. Cornbread. Now, family, I have to be careful here because people have strong feelings about cornbread, and I understand why. There are factions. There are people who grew up with sweet cornbread and people who grew up with no sugar cornbread, and these two groups look at each other across a divide that runs deep. But here's what they have in common. They grew up with real cornbread, made in a cast-iron skillet that had been greased with bacon fat or Crisco and put in the oven to preheat so that when you poured the batter in, it started cooking immediately on contact with the hot iron. and the bottom crust formed in the first 30 seconds. And that crust was unlike anything you can buy at a drive-thru or order from a delivery app. It was thin and hard and almost cracker-like on the very bottom, and it gave way to a dense, crumbly, cornmeal-tasting interior that was nothing like cake, nothing like muffin, nothing like the sweet yellow bread that gets called cornbread at chain restaurants. Big Mama's cornbread tasted like corn, like actual corn, because it was made with cornmeal, not pancake batter with a little yellow food dye. Her children made cornbread. Her daughters kept the cast iron. Her sons knew how the pan was supposed to sound when you put the batter in. Her grandchildren, when they need bread for a Sunday meal, tap on something. Red Lobster Cheddar Bay biscuits show up an hour later, or dinner rolls from somewhere. And those things are good. I'm not saying they're not good, but they do not know what a cast iron skillet smells like when it's been preheating in an oven for 10 minutes. That knowledge is gone, and with it, something irreplaceable. Now, family, we are just getting started. Before we keep going, I want to pause for a second, because I know some of you watching this right now have a dish in your mind, a specific dish. Your grandmother's version of something we've already talked about, or something we haven't gotten to yet. And I want to know about it. Drop a comment below right now. Tell me, what is the one Sunday dinner plate that your Big Mama made that you have never been able to get right yourself? What's the dish that disappeared when she passed, or when she moved, or when life got in the way? Tell me. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, somebody else watching this video made something very close to the same thing, and is looking for the same answer you are. Number 7. Neckbones and rice. This one right here. This is where we separate the people who really know from the people who think they know, because neckbones were not a humble dish. They were not poverty food in the pejorative sense. They were working-class food in the proudest sense. Food that required patience and skill and knowledge to transform something cheap and bony and unfashionable into something extraordinary. Big Mama put neckbones on the stove in a pot of water with an onion cut in half and a couple of cloves of garlic and some black pepper and some salt, and she let them cook. She let them cook for a long time. 2 hours. Sometimes 3. And what happened during those hours was a kind of alchemy. The collagen in the bones dissolved into the broth and made it thick and glossy. The little pockets of meat around each bone softened until they released with the gentlest pull. The fat rendered out and floated on top, and she skimmed it, and the broth underneath was the color of dark honey and tasted like something that took effort to describe. She served it over white rice, long grain, cooked separately, fluffy, each grain distinct. And the broth soaked into the rice and the bones sat on top, and you ate it with a piece of that cast iron cornbread on the side. Back in those days, this was Sunday. This was love, expressed through hours of standing and watching and stirring and tasting. Her children made neck bones when money was short, and sometimes when money wasn't short, because they tasted like Sunday no matter when you had them. Her grandchildren cannot DoorDash neck bones. That's the truth, family. You cannot order neck bones from a restaurant on a delivery app in most American cities right now. The dish has become invisible. It has become a thing that only exists in the homes of people old enough to remember it, and when those people are gone, it may not exist at all. Unless somebody writes it down. Unless somebody sits at Big Mama's knee before it's too late and says, "How much water? How long? How do you know when they're done?" These are questions that need to be asked now. Number 8. Oxtails. Now, oxtails have had something of a moment in recent years. I'll grant you that. You can find oxtails on a delivery app today. Fancy versions, dressed-up versions, restaurant versions that cost $40 for a portion that Big Mama would have made for 4 people for $12 back in 1968. But the oxtail Big Mama made and the oxtail you're tapping on your phone for are cousins at best. They grew up in different houses. Big Mama's oxtails started with a browning. She got those tails dark and caramelized in a Dutch oven with oil so hot it smoked, because she knew that browning was flavor, that you couldn't skip it, that the Maillard reaction was something she understood in her body even if she'd never heard the word. Then came the aromatics: onion, garlic, thyme, a little Worcestershire, tomato paste, beef broth, and a Scotch bonnet pepper if she felt like it that day. Low heat, 3 hours, sometimes 4. The house smelled like a cathedral. Every family member who came through the front door stopped in the hallway and just inhaled, because the smell of oxtail's long cooking told you something good was happening, told you that somebody in this house cared enough to spend the whole day making sure you ate well. Her children braised oxtails, slower than she did, maybe, with slightly different seasoning, but they braised them. Her grandchildren can tap an order. The portion comes in a container. The price is significant. The flavor is present. The 4 hours of love is not. Number 9, sweet potato pie. This is not pumpkin pie. And I need to be clear about that, because the world has confused these two things, and the confusion is an injustice. Sweet potato pie is its own creation, born in black southern kitchens when pumpkins were scarce and sweet potatoes were not, when enslaved women turned what they had into something that could compete with anything at any table in any house in America. Big Mama made her filling from scratch. She roasted the sweet potatoes until they were soft. She scooped the flesh out. She mashed it. She mixed in butter and sugar and eggs and vanilla and cinnamon and a little nutmeg, and she poured it into a crust she had made herself from flour and shortening and ice water, and she crimped the edges with her thumb and first finger in a pattern that was hers alone, a pattern that her daughters would recognize anywhere. The filling was smooth and dense and tasted distinctly of sweet potato, not of pumpkin, not of anything else, just sweet potato, elevated by skill and time, and the particular love that goes into a pie made for people you want to see smile. Her children made sweet potato pie. It appeared at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and at any Sunday dinner where somebody was being celebrated. It was the dessert of accomplishment. Her grandchildren scroll past the pie options on the app. They tap on cheesecake. They tap on something called a sweet potato cheesecake that is not the same thing in any category. And the recipe for Big Mama's pie, the one with the thumb-crimped edges and the particular ratio of spices, that recipe is sitting in someone's head right now, growing older by the day, waiting for someone to ask for it. Now, family, I want to stop here for a moment. Because everything I've been describing to you, these 9 dishes, these recipes, these hours of preparation and love, these are only a fraction of what we almost lost. I put together something called the Soul Roots Cookbook. 100 forgotten Black American recipes, written out the way Big Mama would have done it, complete, patient, and true. With the ingredients, the measurements, and the tips that she never thought to write down because she assumed somebody was paying attention. The link is in the description and pinned right at the top of the comments. You can also scan the code on your screen right now if you're watching on a television. Don't let these recipes disappear. Number 10, black-eyed peas. Big Mama made black-eyed peas from dried. That is the first thing to understand. She did not open a can. She did not use frozen. She bought dried black-eyed peas in a bag, and the night before Sunday dinner, she picked through them. She actually sat at the kitchen table and picked through them by hand, removing the ones that were cracked or off color, or that just didn't look right to her, because she had learned that lesson young and she wasn't unlearning it. Then she soaked them overnight. In the morning, she drained them and started them fresh in a pot with smoked meat, usually ham hocks, sometimes smoked sausage, and she cooked them low for hours. The peas broke down slightly, but not completely. The broth thickened, the smoke from the meat permeated everything, and by the time Sunday dinner was called, those black-eyed peas were an entity. They were not a side dish, they had a presence. Eaten with rice and a piece of cornbread, they were a complete meal all by themselves, and they had been feeding this family through good times and hard times alike. Every New Year's Day they appeared on that table as a matter of survival and tradition, and the understanding that the right foods eaten at the right time could call in something good from the world. Her children kept the black-eyed peas tradition, especially on New Year's. Some of them switched to canned eventually. The overnight soak was one thing to let go of when life got busy. Her grandchildren, if they're thinking about black-eyed peas at all, are clicking on something from a southern restaurant on the app, something that comes in a small container as a side, cooked fast, undersalted, without the hours in the pot that made the broth what it was supposed to be. Number 11. Pig's feet. Now I know some of you just made a face, and I want you to stay with me for a minute, because pig's feet in Big Mama's kitchen were not a joke, and they were not a dare, and they were not something to post about for shock value. They were serious food. They were food that had sustained black families in the South for generations because feet were the part that nobody else wanted. And what the community could not be given, they learned to transform. Big Mama cleaned those feet meticulously, scrubbing, blanching, rinsing, because she had standards, and her standards did not change based on the ingredient. She cooked them in a pot with vinegar and salt and onion and bay leaf until the skin was yielding and the small bones slipped out, and the collagen had turned to something close to jelly. She ate them cold, with hot sauce. She pickled them sometimes. She made them for company without apology, and the people who sat at her table ate them without apology, because they knew where they came from. They knew that the ability to make something beautiful from something overlooked was not a thing to be ashamed of. It was a thing to be proud of. It was a form of genius. Her children made pig's feet less often. It became a thing for older relatives, a thing that the grandchildren turned their noses up at. Her grandchildren do not order pig's feet. They are not on the app, and somewhere in that disappearance, a link in the chain was broken. Not just a recipe lost, but a whole philosophy of cooking, a whole ethic of transformation and resourcefulness and using everything, wasting nothing. That philosophy fed people for generations, and we let it walk out the door. Number 12. Chitterlings. And now we have arrived at the dish that every single black person over a certain age either loved or dreaded, or both simultaneously, depending on the day. Chitterlings, chitlins, if you know what they really are, were the cleaned and cooked intestines of a hog. And the cleaning was the thing. The cleaning was the test. Big Mama spent hours on cleaning day, and yes, it was its own day, usually the day before cooking, removing every bit of waste, rinsing again, rinsing a third time, and rinsing once more, because there was a standard to uphold, and the standard was her name, and her reputation, and her table, and none of those things were to be taken lightly. Then she cooked them low and long with onion and garlic, and apple cider vinegar and hot sauce and black pepper. The smell was pungent. The smell was assertive. The smell told the neighborhood what was happening in that kitchen in a way that nothing else could. And the taste, for those who grew up with them, was a specific taste connected to specific memories, to a particular December, to a certain Saturday in someone's childhood, to a gathering of cousins and aunts, and the sound of a football game on a black and white television in the next room. Her children mostly cleaned and cooked chitlins for the older relatives at the holidays. It was understood to be their duty. They didn't always love the process, but they loved what the process meant. Her grandchildren do not cook chitlins. Very few of them do. And the ones who want to taste them, and some of them do, some of them have that genetic memory pulling at them, cannot find them on any delivery app, because chitterlings are one of the foods that cannot make the journey from someone's kitchen to a foam container without losing everything that made them what they were. Now, family, you have been here through most of this video, and that tells me something. It tells me you understand what we're really talking about. It's not food. It's a record of who we were. It's proof of what our people survived and how they fed each other through it. I know some of you are thinking, I'll ask my aunt. I'll call my mama. I'll try to remember one of these days. Family, I have been doing this long enough to know that one of these days sometimes never comes. The Soul Roots Cookbook, 100 recipes written the way Big Mama made them, with every tip included. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. The QR code is on your screen. I did my part. The rest is yours. Number 13. Crackling cornbread. This is the dish that separates the people who grew up deeply inside the tradition from the people who were adjacent to it. Crackling cornbread, or cracklin' bread, as it was called in every kitchen where it was made, was cornbread with the addition of cracklings, the rendered, crisped-up pieces of pork skin and fat left over after the lard was made. They went into the batter at the end, still warm, slightly greasy, salty in a way that nothing else in the world is salty. They crackled when you bit into them, hence the name. And the cornbread itself absorbed some of their fat and took on a flavor that I am going to struggle to describe adequately, so I'll just say this. Once you've had crackling cornbread made properly, you understand why nobody who grew up eating it has ever been fully satisfied by regular cornbread again. Big Mama made this because nothing went to waste. The cracklings were a byproduct. The byproduct became the best thing in the oven. Her children made crackling cornbread when they rendered lard, which was less and less frequently as commercial lard, and then Crisco replaced the home-rendered version. Her grandchildren cannot order this from anywhere. It does not exist on any delivery platform in America. And that, family, should tell you something about what we've lost. Not just the dish, but the entire system of resourcefulness and zero waste that produced it. Number 14. Butter beans with ham. Back in those days, butter beans, large, creamy, pale lima beans, were a staple of the Southern Black Sunday table. Not because they were fancy, because they were filling and they were cheap, and in Big Mama's hands, they became something you actually craved. She started with dried beans, soaked overnight. She cooked them with a ham hock or salt pork, low heat, long time, just the way she did everything that needed time to become itself. She seasoned them with black pepper and onion, and a pinch of sugar at the end. A trick her mother had taught her, a small kindness to the bean that opened up its flavor in a way nothing else could. The finished product was a pot of beans, whose broth was thicker than any canned version you've ever seen, whose beans held their shape but yielded completely at the touch of a spoon, whose ham had given everything it had to the pot and was now just a sweet, soft shadow of itself. Served over rice or with cornbread, butter beans were the kind of food that made you quiet, that made you sit down and pay attention, that made you feel, briefly but fully, provided for. Her children made butter beans on Sundays and weeknights both. They were economical and fast enough once you had the technique. Her grandchildren tap on something. There is no butter bean and ham plate available for delivery in most American cities. There is no pot of something cooked for 4 hours that can be tapped into existence on a phone. And the recipe, the amount of sugar, the size of the ham hock, the particular moment when the beans are done, is living in somebody's memory right now. And that memory will not wait forever. Number 15. Stewed okra and tomatoes. If you grew up in a Southern Black household, okra was not optional. Okra was a fact of life. It grew in the garden. It came in brown paper bags from neighbors who had too much. It appeared on the Sunday table in some form from the first of the summer through the last of the fall, and Big Mama had more than one way of treating it. Stewed okra and tomatoes was the Sunday version. The considered version, the one that required time and attention. She cut the okra into rounds, not too thin, not too thick. This was a judgment call that she had been making for 40 years. She cooked onion and garlic in a little bacon fat first. Then she added sliced tomatoes, fresh ones in summer, canned ones when she had no choice, and she let them cook down for a while before the okra went in. Then everything cooked together. The okra releasing its silky quality into the tomatoes becoming sweeter as they cooked, the whole pot thickening into something between a stew and a sauce. Over rice. Every time. The okra and the tomatoes and the rice existed together as a complete thought, and eating them separately would have been a kind of grammatical error. Her children made stewed okra. Some of them didn't like okra. The texture was a thing for some people. But they made it because it was what you made. Her grandchildren do not tap on stewed okra and tomatoes. It is not there. It is not on any screen they scroll. It is the kind of dish that requires a garden or a farmer's market and 45 minutes of intention, and it has no equivalent in any delivery category that currently exists. It is a dish that will survive only in the hands of people willing to make it, and right now, those hands are getting older. Number 16. Fried catfish. Now, if you grew up anywhere near water in the South, catfish was not exotic. Catfish was Friday. Catfish was what your grandfather caught in the river before the sun came up, and it was what he brought home in a cooler with ice And it was what Big Mama cleaned and seasoned and fried by Friday afternoon, so the whole house smelled of hot grease and cornmeal and fish from the moment you got home from school. She made her own coating: cornmeal, a little flour, cayenne, salt, garlic powder. And she dredged those fillets, and she fried them in a cast-iron skillet with about an inch of oil until they were golden and crackling, and the flesh inside was white and sweet and flaked apart with a fork without asking. She served them with hot sauce and white bread and a side of coleslaw she had made herself, shredded cabbage with a vinegar dressing that cut right through the richness of the fish. That was the full plate. That was the Friday evening version of grace. Her children made fried catfish. They bought it at the seafood counter when the river wasn't close, but they made it at home, in a skillet, with a coating. Her grandchildren open the app and they find the catfish at the soul food spot or the seafood restaurant, and it comes in a box, and it is not bad. But the white bread is not there. The homemade coleslaw is not there. The grandfather who caught the fish is not there. The particular Friday evening feeling of family coming together over something somebody caught is not there. What they receive is a product. What they remember, even if they've only heard about it, is an event. Number 17, potato salad. I want to be careful here because potato salad is one of the dishes most likely to start an argument at a family reunion. And I have seen it happen, and I have no interest in starting that particular fire today. But I will say this: Big Mama's potato salad was not anyone else's potato salad. It was hers. It was the product of specific decisions made by a specific person with specific opinions about mustard versus mayonnaise, about whether the potatoes should be firm or soft, about whether the eggs should be quartered or sliced, about the exact amount of sweet pickle relish, and whether celery was appropriate or unnecessary. Those decisions had been made over years of trial and error and feedback from the people who sat at her table, and they had been refined into something that was as much her signature as her handwriting. When you ate her potato salad, you were tasting her judgment. Her children made potato salad. They argued about whether they had gotten it right. They called her to ask about the mustard. Her grandchildren tap on a restaurant that offers a soul food plate with potato salad as a side. The potato salad arrives and it is fine, and it is competent, and it tastes like somebody's decision about mustard and mayonnaise and relish. But it doesn't taste like Big Mama's decision. It never will. Because Big Mama's decision was not a recipe. It was a personality. And personalities cannot be delivered. Number 18. Crackling bread was already said. Let me give you ham and redeye gravy. Ham and redeye gravy. This is one of the old ones, family. This goes back before the war, before the Depression, before everything. This is a dish that has roots in the very earliest black cooking tradition in the South. Redeye gravy is made from the drippings of a fried country ham, the real kind, salt-cured and aged, the kind that comes from a hog that lived, and the kind that costs real money now, but used to be what was hanging in the smokehouse. And a cup of black coffee poured directly into those drippings and scraped up together. That's it. Ham, drippings, and coffee. The result is thin and dark and intense and smoky and slightly bitter, and it is poured over the ham and over biscuits, and it is the taste of a southern morning in a way that nothing else approximates. Big Mama made this for Sunday morning before church, before the big dinner. This was the early morning meal, the fuel meal, the quiet kitchen meal before the house filled up. Her children made redeye gravy sometimes. It required country ham, and as supermarket ham replaced salt-cured ham in most pantries, the dish became rarer. Her grandchildren tap on an IHOP order through an app and get a side of something called country gravy, which has nothing to do with country ham, and nothing to do with coffee, and nothing to do with the taste of a Sunday morning in that kitchen. The substitution is so complete that most of them don't know there was an original. Number 19. Peach cobbler. If there was a fruit cobbler on the Sunday table, and there usually was in summer, it was made from fruit that was in season because that is what existed. In July and August, that fruit was peaches. Big Mama made her cobbler with fresh peaches, sliced, tossed with sugar and cinnamon and a little lemon juice, and a batter she poured over the top that wasn't quite a pie crust and wasn't quite a cake. It was something between the two, something that existed in its own category. Thick enough to form a crust on top in the oven, but thin enough to seep down into the peaches as it baked and absorb some of their juice and become, in those places, almost caramelized and chewy. She put a pat of butter on top before it went into the oven. She didn't use a recipe. She used her hand to measure the sugar, her eye to judge the batter, and her nose to know when it was done. It came out of the oven smelling like summer had been concentrated and put into a pan. She served it warm, in bowls, sometimes with a scoop of vanilla ice cream if there was any in the house. And the people who ate it were briefly and completely at peace. Her children made peach cobbler. They wrote some things down. The cobbler was still good. Her grandchildren, when they want something sweet after a Sunday meal that arrived by delivery, tap on dessert from the same app, and something arrives in a cup or a slice. It is sweet. It is fine. It did not come from summer peaches and a grandmother's hands, and there are fewer and fewer grandmothers whose hands know how to make it. Number 20. Oxtail soup. Different from the braised oxtails we talked about earlier. This is the soup version, the one that appeared on the coldest Sundays of the year, when the temperature dropped and the church had been long and everyone was chilled to the bone and needed something that restored them from the inside out. Big Mama made this in a large pot with the oxtails browned first, then vegetables, carrot, celery, onion, turnip sometimes, then enough beef broth and water to cover everything, and then hours of simmering. The broth became mahogany-colored and silky from the collagen. The vegetables softened into the liquid and gave everything they had, and the little pieces of meat around each tailbone fell off and were tender in a way that nothing quick can ever be tender. She served it with a slice of white bread, and sometimes with rice on the side, and after a bowl of it, you were warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. You were warm from the inside. You were warm in a way that meant somebody loved you enough to stand at a stove for 4 hours. Her children made oxtail soup in winter. It was a specific season dish. Her grandchildren don't have an oxtail soup option on the delivery app. They have ramen. They have pho, both of which are also long cooked, and also rich and also warming. And I don't say that to dismiss them, because those are beautiful dishes in their own traditions. But they are not this. They are not the taste of a specific grandmother on a specific cold Sunday in a specific small house that smelled of something good from the moment you walked in the door. Number 21. Fatback and beans. This was the plainest dish on this entire list, and I saved it for near the end because I want you to understand what plain meant in Big Mama's kitchen. It did not mean poor. It did not mean lacking. It meant essential. It meant reduced to the purest statement of what food could do. Dried navy beans or pinto beans soaked overnight, cooked all day with a piece of fatback, the cured pork fat from the back of the hog, sold cheap because it was mostly fat, seasoned with nothing but salt and pepper and thyme. The result was a pot of beans that tasted like the simplest and most true version of what beans could be. Earthy, creamy, saturated with the flavor of the cured pork, filling in a way that stayed with you. This was the dish you made when money was lowest and hunger was highest, and you needed something that could feed 6 people for the cost of almost nothing. And Big Mama made it with the same care and the same attention and the same pride she brought to anything else she put on that table, because the family eating it deserved that care whether the dish cost 20 cents or $20. Her children made fatback and beans. Fewer and fewer as time passed, and as the economy shifted, and as the idea of eating fat as a primary ingredient stopped being acceptable. Her grandchildren cannot tap on this. It is not there. It has never been on any delivery platform. It exists only in the homes and memories of people old enough to know what it was and why it mattered. And the day the last person who knows how to make it is gone, it will be gone with them, unless someone sits down and asks, unless someone listens, unless someone writes it down. Number 22. The Sunday table itself. And now we have arrived at the 22nd plate on our list. And I want you to understand that I have saved this one for last because it is the most important one. And it is the one that no delivery app can ever send to your door. The Sunday table was not a dish. But it was something you ate from every single Sunday. You ate from the presence of people who loved you. You ate from the noise and the laughter and the argument about who got the last piece of chicken. You ate from the grace your grandfather said before the food was touched. The long one. The one that covered everybody by name, including the ones who had passed on, because they were still at that table in the way that mattered. You ate from the stories that came out between the second and third helping. The stories about people who weren't there anymore. The stories that taught you who you came from without ever using the word history. You ate from the weight of your grandmother's hand on your shoulder when she came around to refill your glass. You ate from the feeling of being known, of being seen, of being accounted for. Big Mama built that table every Sunday. It took her from Saturday night through Sunday afternoon. It cost her feet hurting and her back aching and her hands tired. And she did it every single week without complaint and without being asked, because she understood something that is harder and harder to find in the world now. That feeding people is an act of love, and love is not convenient, and love does not arrive in 45 minutes at your door. Her children carried the table forward for as long as they could. Some of them still do. Some of them are reading this description right now and thinking of their own Sunday tables, their own attempts to keep the tradition alive in a world that keeps making it harder. Her grandchildren, the ones tapping on apps, the ones eating from foam containers on a Sunday evening alone in their apartments, they are not lost. They are not bad people. They are people who were never fully shown what they were missing. And that, family, is what this channel exists to fix. Not to judge, not to shame, but to show, to remind, to preserve. One Sunday at a time. Big Mama wasn't just feeding her family. She was keeping a tradition alive. She was saying, we are still here. We survived. We sit down together. We pray. We laugh. We argue. We pass the roles. We remember the ones who aren't here anymore. We stay connected to each other and to who we are. That tradition is not lost. It is waiting. It is waiting in the memory of every person watching this video who knows what a Sunday table felt like. And it will only be lost if we let it be. If we tap instead of cook. If we scroll instead of remember. If we receive instead of gather. So the next Sunday, you have free. And I'm not saying every Sunday, family, I know how life is. The next one you have. Make one dish, just one. Look up how Big Mama made it. Ask somebody who remembers. Or check the link in the description, because the Soul Roots cookbook has 100 of them, written out the way they were supposed to be written, with the time and the care and the tips that never made it into any other cookbook. One dish, one Sunday, one act of remembering. Share this video with somebody in your family who is still carrying these recipes in their head and has never written a single one of them down. This might be the thing that finally gets them to write it down. And subscribe, family, because next time we're going back to somewhere just as real as where we went today. I'll see you next time, family.